Hello, I am Claire Saxton, Senior Director of Education with the Cancer Support Community. Welcome to our webinar, Frankly Speaking About Cancer, Moving Beyond Treatment, hosted by the Cancer Support Community. If you need technical assistance during this webinar, please dial 1-866-229-3239 using option number 1. Before we start, I'll go over some reminders and housekeeping items. If you would like to listen to today's presentation via telephone, please dial in using the conference line code you see on the screen. Today's call is being recorded and will be available on our website at www.cancersupportcommunity.org/webinars within the next week. The format of today's webinar will be as follows. The panelists will present first, and then we will open up the discussion to the audience during the question and answer session. Thank you to those who submitted questions prior to the webinar as part of the registration form. If you would like to ask additional questions, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box on the right of your screen. You may submit a question at any time during the event. I would now like to introduce the Cancer Support Community, which is the largest professionally led nonprofit network of cancer support worldwide. CSC is dedicated to ensuring that all people impacted by cancer are empowered by knowledge, strengthened by action, and sustained by community. We offer the highest quality social and emotional support through our affiliate network, as well as online or over the phone. On this screen, you'll see some of the resources we provide at the Cancer Support Community. The first one there is the Cancer Support Helpline, which is staffed by licensed professional counselors who are available to assist you Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We also have our Open to Options program, which is a research-proven program that can help you prepare a list of questions to share with your doctor to help you make a treatment decision. The third thing on the slide is our Frankly Speaking About Cancer program, which is CSC's landmark education series that provides trusted information on a variety of topics important to people affected by cancer. Information is available through print and digital publications, online, and in-person programs. For the complete list of publications, please visit orders.cancersupportcommunity.org. I would also like to introduce our Cancer Experience Registry, which is a unique project for people affected by cancer. People who have been diagnosed with cancer and those who help care for them can join the registry. You begin by answering survey questions. Your answers and those of others describe the experience of cancer patients and caregivers. This information is used to provide education and support resources that speak to patients, caregivers, and their needs. For more information or to join, visit www.cancerexperienceregistry.org. I would also like to take a moment to talk to you about our grassroots movement, which helps ensure that people touched by cancer have access to quality, comprehensive cancer care that includes social and emotional support. Again, if you would like to learn more about this program or to sign up, visit our main website at www.cancersupportcommunity.org/join-our-movement. I would now like to introduce our panelists, Charli Prather-Levinson and Carolyn Lammersfeld. Charli is a licensed clinical social worker. She received her Master's of Social Work with an emphasis on health and began working over 20 years ago as a hospice and palliative care social worker. She has worked for the Cancer Support Community for over 11 years, first as a program director of our St. Louis affiliate, and for the last 5.5 years as a Helpline Counselor. Charli also runs yoga and cancer sessions. Carolyn Lammersfeld holds a board certification in oncology nutrition. She received her master's degree in clinical nutrition from Rush University in Chicago and an MBA in Healthcare Management from the Quinlan School of Business at Loyola University in Chicago. Carolyn joined the Cancer Treatment Centers of America team in 1998 as Director of Nutrition at CTA at Midwestern Regional Medical Center. Since 2012, she has worked as the Vice President of Integrative Oncology to assist CTCA in coordinating its integrative oncology program across all regional centers. I'm now going to ask Charli to talk to us about emotional wellness during and after cancer treatment.
So I have also seen people get beautiful support from very well-trained mentors, and I think a lot of times the mentors are overlooked. It's another layer of support that is very important to certain folks. It can be a really lovely experience with a well-trained mentor. I also believe strongly in looking at psychotherapy. Many cancer centers have that built into the treatment program, so they have oncology social workers on hand if you're visiting the center or for follow-up. They have oncology psychologists, oncology psychiatrists, so lots and lots of help out there. So we'll talk more about where to get help later on in the slides as well. So the end of treatment, that's a pretty important one. I don't really want to skip over on this slide. It's really important to educate everybody in your support system on what you need right now. The end of treatment is not necessarily the end of your experience. Some survivors want nothing more to do with anything cancer-related. They're burning the pink shirts. They don't want to talk about it anymore. There's no right or wrong answer here. But there are other folks who really, really need that continued support. So the people that are in your lives, just because treatment's over, they can't read your mind if you still need support. So relationships with other people are much better when you can be really helpful and honest with them. You've got to give them the answers. Sometimes you just have to give them the answers. So to piggyback on what I'd said before, the only way that people in your relationship circle know how to support you is if you tell them how to support you. So I hear from survivors a lot on the helpline and out in the cancer centers that a lot of their relationships have changed since their diagnosis. So you might want to think about talking to some of those people when you're feeling about that, kind of how your perception is that the relationship has changed. In some cases, I hear survivors are simply not interested in rekindling relationships that they feel were severed during their time in treatment. So again, there's really no right or wrong answer here. So under practical manners, I recommend that if you had systems in place during treatment that were really helpful to you, like people picking up kids for you, walking your dog, going to the grocery, keep those systems in place for a month or two after treatment ends. It's typically the time that I hear from survivors. They are exhausted, they're upset, they feel like the rug's been pulled out from under them, they need their support systems, and they're missing in action. We can go to the next slide now. So distress. Distress is described as an emotional state with a range of experiences within a person's internal life. Now, I know that sounds really clinical. So in layman's terms, it means out of the ordinary. Something happens to you out of the ordinary, and you have an inability to cope with that. So cancer diagnosis is certainly out of the ordinary, so it would fall under distress. Now, stress is considered the body's response to changes or demands, so stress can be good or bad. I personally don't like to consider all distress bad either. There are certain people who respond to distress positively. I've seen cancer survivors who decide after going through a certain amount of distress that today is the day they decide to do something new, do something different, do one thing different. A lot of cancer survivors will decide this is the day I take up the piano. This is the day I'm going to start hiking a trail, even if I can only go 3 or 4 steps. maybe this is the day I start doing something ordinary that I never really did before, like learn how to cook whole food. And Carolyn's going to talk a lot about nutrition later on in our slide presentation. She's a wealth of information on this. So many cancer patients decide they're going to lose weight. Maybe they'll stop eating processed food altogether as a result of being in distress. So again, it's not necessarily a bad thing that you've gone through a distress state. So some common emotions, I'm going to touch on the less obvious here because this is a big slide. We don't have time to go over all of them. Guilt is one that a lot of people don't realize they may have. Guilt, I've seen a lot of parents feel guilty that they're undergoing cancer treatment and their children are having to watch that. I've also watched boomers who have adult children who've had to step up and help take on some responsibilities with caring for them, and they happen to be in a sandwich generation situation where they've got young kids and now they've got a sick parent. So that's a very real emotion that needs to be addressed. Survivor guilt is common when a survivor's had a positive outcome after treatment. And maybe they've interfaced with a lot of patients during treatment that maybe didn't have such a great outcome or had more side effects than they had. So that's, again, something that needs to be talked about. Anger is another tricky emotion that I like to touch on. Someone once said to me that anger is just sad's bodyguard, and I love that. It's one of my favorite sayings. Not all anger has to negatively affect you, though. It could be a catalyst for making some lifestyle changes or facing emotions that are uncomfortable, and maybe you've had those emotions for a long time, and now you finally decided to deal with that. So coping with distress, which is the next slide, some active coping mechanisms are things like reminding yourself why you're going to put a place of support, a support system into place for yourself, like changing your lifestyle or learning something new, seeking more education on survivorship. That's actively coping. Avoidant coping is flat-out denial that you need any support at all, or simply being unable to directly ask for support. Again, it's very important that you let people know what you need. They don't know what you need. They're civilians. They're cancer civilians. They don't know. Or thinking, oh, you know what, I just need to get over this. So there was a time when we were directed to tell patients to use the stop thought process. And now we've learned a lot about leaning into things instead of trying to stop these thoughts, because what we find is if we try to stop all of these thoughts, they just get bigger and bigger. So now we've been taught to teach patients and survivors to lean into some of these feelings, and that may mean expressing them in some way. So with that being said, leaning into them is a very good thing, unless that's all you're doing. Then it's counterproductive. So there are ways to move around in that situation that we're going to talk about in another slide. So it's also important to note that withdrawing from social experiences can lead to an increase in depression and anxiety. So we want to make sure that we're not isolating. So how do we cope? So we're going to spend a little bit more time on that. It's really important that if you feel like your coping mechanisms aren't up to what you need, or maybe someone has let you know that, hey, I don't think you're coping very well. You're making the family crazy right now. You may want to be evaluated for these symptoms. They could be affecting all of your intimate relationships. So there's a very strong possibility you could be suffering from PTSD that was brought on by your medical treatment. And I have that discussion a lot with people. They don't realize that could be part of their issue. It may not be necessarily depression or anxiety. It could be some post-trauma. Medical trauma is very, very real, and we're just really learning about that. And it should be treated with specific protocols, and there are specific protocols for that, like eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, cognitive reprocessing therapy, and other modalities that have a really high success rate. And you can certainly Google a lot of that to find out more information on that, to see if maybe that's where your symptoms are falling. So, and I'm more than happy to send some things as a follow-up, and, if people have questions that we don't have time to get to today. So the avoidant coping, denying the problem exists and avoiding any thoughts about the problem, will usually end up resurfacing later. So you're really better off dealing with it as it comes up. Blaming yourself for having these feelings won't get you to the next place either. So again, layering support by increasing social experiences and finding a mentor, for some people, support groups are a beautiful thing, and for other people, not so much. They take on some of the other people's emotions and problems. You'll know if it's right for you. It's not right for everybody. So you can move on to the next slide, Chelsea. So recognizing when you need support, it may be you may need to ask your family or you may need to ask your intimate circle what they think. Also, our Helpline Counselors have an ongoing collaboration with the American Psychosocial Oncology Society. And so that particular line will ring into us, and we can assist callers with finding a provider, a mental health provider in their area who has the appropriate skill set to help them with sometimes some really complex emotions. It's important to know that not all mental health providers have to have oncology experience or be a cancer survivor. I hear that a lot. In order to help you. In fact, it's not real prevalent that you'll see someone with a lot of oncology experience on their business card or their shingle. So very important that you ask for our help. We can really help you sift through that. We can look at profiles from a list that we have, and we can also do some other professional searches for you. We take that very seriously. We take a look at those profiles. We look to see if they're using evidence-based modalities that we know work really well with cancer patients. So if you can find a licensed provider who has some great experience with grief and loss or chronic illness, they can be very, very good at helping you learn new coping mechanisms. So a lot of people call and they want to know, how do I feel more positive? I want to feel better. Or I want to be happy again. They don't feel like they're happy again. And I think that happy factor is maybe not realistic. Peaceful, I think, is a good reframe. How do I find peace? How do I find more peace? So a couple ways that we found have been extremely helpful with cancer patients, and there are a lot of cancer treatment facilities out there who are incorporating mind-body activities. There are wonderful programs for Tai Chi, Qigong, mindfulness meditation, yoga. Yoga for cancer is an actual real thing. Tari Prinster wrote a beautiful book on that and teaches yoga instructors how to teach specifically to people who think they can't do yoga. Learning how to activate the relaxation side of your nervous system, that parasympathetic side of your brain. Believe it or not, you can actually learn how to do that. You don't have to have been born with a calm brain. Laughing. I love it that they put that in the slide because I really, really love to hear people belly laugh at least once a day, even when things aren't going right. So you might have to pull up a YouTube video with cute kittens or look at an old Seinfeld episode to make yourself do that. But it's important. And there's a lot of good evidence out there that says that belly laughing is really good for you. So being mentally and physically active, another thing that's very, very important. Carolyn's going to touch on that later. When we're physically active, it's really good for our brain. And there's also a ton of evidence out there about physical activity and the lessening of depression and anxiety symptoms. So start where you are. Don't start where you think you need to be. If you can only walk outside and walk back in again, then walk outside and walk back in again, because tomorrow you may be able to walk to the mailbox. So talking about your fears has been very helpful for a lot of people, but it can trigger other people. So you'll know if that's the right coping mechanism for you. I like mindfulness-based training and cognitive behavioral therapy for cancer patients and survivors. I think those are two very, very important things. If we have time to talk about what those actually look like, we will, but I do want to be mindful of Carolyn's time. So some very common feelings about treatment is that the ability to find your new normal, and I know a lot of people, when they hear people talking to them about the new normal, they really get their back up. But the truth is we're always changing, regardless if we've had cancer or not. We are facing new normals at every stage in our life. It's a very important time to know that your focus needs to be on you and your medical treatment. Is that always realistic? Heck no. If you've got 2 kids to pick up under the age of 5 at daycare right after chemo, yeah, you can't really focus on yourself. Again, asking for layers of support, really, really important. That future, that uncertainty, very important that we live for right now. We live for today. There's a lot of not only religious but spiritual backgrounds out there that talk about suffering, and that suffering really is either staying in the past or moving too far forward into the future rather than appreciating what we have right now today. I had a caller today with an advanced stage of a very difficult cancer who told me, she said, I love my chemo. I'm tired of my family telling me how much I'm going through. You know what? It's giving me more time. And every day is a blessing. And I don't get a lot of calls like that, so she really gave me a boost today. So that uncertainty, that's another reason when you've got that uncertainty that you can't stop that mind loop of uncertainty to reach out for help. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So relationships, very important again. The need for more practical help. Again, that network of support can make a difference, but we get a lot of calls of people who have no one. So you might have to build your support system. And that means work for you. It does. It means you've got work to do. There are ways to do that. There are mentoring organizations that can match you directly with a mentor. If you're working, asking your friends and your coworkers to help you out. Cancer and Careers is an amazing educational tool with a lot of downloadable packets for managers and coworkers so that they can understand what you're going through when you come back to work or if you're working through your treatment. So getting back to the more practical help, I do want to mention I used to do something called the kitchen table list before computers. There's something called the kitchen table list that we came up with, and we would put a clipboard of things that needed to be done on the kitchen table so that anybody that came over to visit would see it. And we would have places for someone to write their name on the other side of it so they could match themselves with what to do. Now they've got a great website called Lots of Helping Hands. So you can do that on a website and then have someone that loves you send it out to all of your friends and your family. So a lot of stress can be caused by switching roles from caring for other people to having to be cared for yourself, and wanting to protect kids, and the need for more practical help. That's where that sense of guilt I see come in a lot. I see that a lot. Treatment can be exhausting. And when we're exhausted, we can get angry, depressed, anxious, all of those things that we had talked about before. So all the more reason to be really upfront about how you're feeling. And there's certainly certain drugs that we're given when we're in treatment that keep affecting us even after. So very important that we keep those lines of communication open and allow yourself to be cared for by other people. Very important. You can go on to the next one. Are the kids okay? We've got a beautiful book that addresses all of this. This is actually a whole webinar on its own, but we've got a Frankly Speaking About Cancer book that's downloadable and also in print called What Do I Tell the Kids? That can be very, very helpful for people with regard to preparing yourself and how children notice changes, how to time conversations, and what language to use. We can't shield our kids. Kids pick up on things energetically in the house when things are going on, and especially when people are going behind closed doors and trying to shield the kids from what's happening. Kids almost always know, so it's important to loop them in in an age-appropriate way. So you'll notice some things in sleeping patterns, drops in grades, unusual behavior, getting in arguments, withdrawal, especially with teenagers. I see more emotional withdrawal than anything, and actually anger at the person with cancer. And this can be a very difficult thing to address. Again, it's very important that we get it all out there. This may be the time to call a good family therapist and have a family discussion that's facilitated appropriately by someone who can keep tensions low. So our friends and our coworkers can have a huge influence on how we're doing. If we are being ignored at work while we're moving through treatment or when we come back, or a legal line has been crossed, it can cause a lot of stress and a lot of distress. So there are a lot of federal laws out there to protect you. You can take a look at those. Again, I cannot tell you how invaluable cancerandcareers.org has been for me in helping people return to work or work through treatment. They're also available by phone. You can actually call them and get some ideas on how best to handle things with friends and coworkers and managers. They even have downloadable packets. So intimacy, physical and emotional closeness, it's a basic human need. So we look and feel different before, during, after. I've always been interested in this 30 to 50% of adults say they feel closer to their partner than before their diagnosis, because we don't get those calls. We get the calls from people who don't feel closer, who feel like their partner's angry with them or they have disconnected in some way. So there are certainly places that you can go to help reacquaint yourselves with each other, because you are going to be different when you're finished with treatment. You've gone through a battle together. You may have some emotional scars regarding that battle. So very important that we try to find some meaning in that and try to restore whatever we've lost in those intimate relationships. Intimacy has more to do with emotional intimacy than physical intimacy, although physical intimacy can certainly be affected by a cancer diagnosis. You can go to the next one. Yeah. So most sexual problems after cancer fall into these 3 items. So they have some really terrific suggestions here. One thing that I would like to add to that list of suggestions is physical therapists who've been trained in pelvic floor rehabilitation. They are rather new on the cancer front, and they're doing some really important work. So along with the urologist or the gynecologist for some of these dysfunctions and difficulties, can be very, very important to layer on a physical therapist on top of that. And there are also sex therapists out there. I think people think that sex therapists are all about the mechanics of intimacy, but there's a lot more to that because our intimacy starts in our brain. So a sex therapist can address those intimacy issues that affect the body and also talk about side effect management because a certified sex therapist has had a lot of medical training. Sorry, I just lost my slide, guys. So finding meaning, again, and improving your communication. Again, talking negative and positive feelings. Be good to yourself. Be clear. Find support when you need it. Again, support groups and counseling, there are all types of support groups, especially with regard to survivorship. I have a tendency to lean towards survivorship programs that have you moving and doing things together socially. And the reason I like these is because it really moves people into the next place rather than talking about how things have gone during treatment. It really gives people an opportunity to socialize with other survivors and learn a lot more about what their bodies can and cannot do. And there are certainly plenty of YMCA programs, cancer transition programs. There are even health counselors out there and physicians who deal with side effects that are related to cancer. We can certainly help you on the helpline trying to navigate some of those conversations about some of these side effects and emotional side effects. A lot of people call and they just want the words. They just want the verbiage to talk to the person that they care about the most or the person that may have fallen off the face of the earth when they felt like they really needed them. So practical matters, again, making sure that if you put any systems in place while you were receiving treatment, make sure they're still there a month or two out. This causes a lot of emotional distress for folks. Go ahead and get through these so we can get to Carolyn. So finding meaning in your experience. A lot of people like to work in cancer centers or become a mentor. Know that doing that is great, but only if it restores you. Be very mindful if you get triggered by someone else's diagnosis. It's not necessarily right for everybody. Tapping into your spirituality is really important. It doesn't have to be necessarily religion. It could be bringing some sort of a meditation to you. Sitting on a pillow cross-legged isn't necessarily the only thing that meditation is. You can meditate by cooking food. You can meditate by running. You can meditate by just walking the dog. These are all meaningful things. So we're going to talk to Carolyn.
Great. Thank you, Charli. Now Carolyn will talk to us about nutrition and exercise during and after cancer treatment.
Thank you.
Charli. Yes, go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to share a bit about nutrition and survivorship with you. So I'm planning on talking about eating right for health and survivorship and what that may mean based on the current evidence. I think it's important to keep in mind that this is not an all or nothing proposition, and what eating right means for you may take some time to figure out, so it doesn't look the same for everybody. as a general rule of thumb, I like to encourage the people I work with to follow the 80-20 or 90-10 rule, so that if 80 to 90% of what they're eating is healthy, non-processed food that is helping with their health and their well-being, they're really ahead of the game. We have literature right now that suggests that 70% of the typical American diet is processed food and only 30% healthy, non-processed food. So if you're 80-20 or 90-10, you're well ahead of the game. We'll talk a little bit about obesity and cancer risk, and then dietary supplements. And Charli mentioned, developing a support system, and it's going to be very important, to have that support system and enlist them to help with achieving your nutrition and exercise goals. Okay. So I think it's important to keep in mind that research on nutrition and cancer is still developing. Nutrition is a science, and so the more we study something, the more we learn about it. Recommendations can and do change. This is why you hear things change and it can be confusing. It's also why I'm very careful about avoiding absolutes in regards to most foods. 30 years ago, nuts were not considered part of a healthy diet. And of course, the more we studied nuts and learned about the different types of fats in nuts, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it became very clear that indeed nuts were part of a healthy diet. So I think that's an important factor to keep in mind. It's also important to keep in mind that there are many factors that interact that make our bodies susceptible or resistant to disease, that increase our risk or decrease our risk. It's also important to know that the exact role of nutrition in preventing cancer recurrence is still largely unknown. We have some small studies where we're getting some signals about what may or may not help, but again, they're not large enough to really draw any generalizable conclusions at this time. It's also important to know that different cancers and or treatments may have different nutritional concerns. And I can tell you, based on my experience, you can also have two people with the same cancer that have been treated or are being treated with the same treatments and still have different needs. So this is highly individualized. If you have another condition like diabetes or celiac or gluten sensitivity, that can further change the recommendation. So I'm going to be talking at a very general level and just remind you that anything you're thinking of doing with regards to diet change or exercise, you should really run by your primary care or healthcare provider and get assistance that way. Also, be careful about jumping on the latest fad and diet bandwagon. Any advice, really should be based on multiple studies. We tend to look at studies that are called meta-analyses or systematic reviews, where many studies are combined, so you have thousands or tens of thousands of individuals, and then you really have enough numbers to be able to draw meaningful conclusions. I like to think of the examples, one example of olive oil. If you start Googling or looking up olive oil, you can find studies that both say it may be healthy with regards to your heart or your immune system, and you may find studies to say it's not healthy. But if you look at where the overwhelming evidence is, it is that olive oil is a healthy oil to use. So next slide. So what are some of the potential benefits of eating right? One, it may help with your strength, healing and rebuilding tissue after treatment, feeling well. It can help with fatigue as part of an overall approach to managing fatigue. Food has calories, and calories are energy, so it's important that we feed our bodies to help with fatigue. Eating a variety of foods, and no one food has everything you need. I think it's also important to know that eating a variety of food helps with minimizing exposure to pesticides if you're eating conventional. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit as well. And really important is eating right may help maintain a healthy body weight. And I can't over stress this enough, and much of what I'm going to talk about also relates to how eating right may help with body weight. We've actually known for a while, but I don't know if you've seen it in the media recently, there's been more and more attention to the fact that obesity is quickly catching up to tobacco as a leading preventable cause of cancer. It's associated with the risk of at least 13 types of cancer. It's been linked to poor prognoses for cancer survivors, as well as increased risk of recurrence and second primary cancers. course, it may also increase your risk for diabetes and heart disease and other chronic illnesses. So in this area, what I would suggest is if you don't know what your BMI or body mass index is, which is a calculation we use with your height and weight, it's a way to screen to see if you're carrying extra body weight. So it's something to discuss with your primary care health provider, just to find out if you're in that category. And certainly they should be able to help you with resources if you need to have some work to do in this area. And I think the most important thing to know is that even though we have all these charts and tables with BMI that suggest what a healthy weight is for us, that's also very individualized as well. And some of those small studies I mentioned where we're getting signals suggest that even a 5% loss of body weight if you have extra weight can be beneficial. So again, not an all or nothing proposition here, but important to know and be mindful of. Next slide. So what type of foods should you try to meet the current guidelines we have based on the evidence available that may help with many of the things we mentioned as well as body weight? And one is focusing on plant-based food or a plant-based diet. All organizations that make recommendations regarding diet and cancer agree here that really if our diet is primarily plant-based foods, we're going to be much better off, and I'll discuss why in a little bit. And what do we mean by plant-based foods? Not surprisingly, vegetables, fruits, vegetable and fruit juices. These are low-calorie options, but they also provide vitamins, minerals, fiber, which can help you feel full in between meals, and phytochemicals, which are compounds in foods that aren't necessarily vitamins or minerals, but have various activities at the cellular level that may be beneficial. Again, most of the studies we have in this area are preliminary in labs and animals, but again, we get some signals there of some other reasons why fruits and vegetables may be important to have in your diet. And one caution with juices is you need to be careful with the portions. So, juices, vegetable and or fruit juices can be a way to get more fruits and vegetables in if you're struggling. Sometimes they're easier to tolerate for individuals. But keep the portion small because calories add up really fast in juices compared to eating the whole fruits or vegetables. So I generally, suggest a portion of about 4 ounces, probably no more than, once or twice a day, unless that's the only way you're getting fruits and vegetables. The other thing is if you're juicing, try to make sure you're using a juicer that doesn't extract the pulp from your fruits and vegetables. So, the ones where it shoots off to the side, unless you're adding that back to soups and muffins and stuff, you're really throwing out the fiber and some of those, actually a good proportion of those beneficial phytochemicals. So make sure you're using a juicer that blends up all parts of the fruits and vegetables to get the most benefit. Other things on a plant-based diet would be whole grains and legumes being beans, lentils, split peas, and whole wheat products like brown rice, quinoa, and many others. Again, for the fiber, but also the best form of carbohydrates to give you energy. We get a lot of questions about organic food, and the answer isn't always easy here. The studies are mixed in this area as far as risk with pesticides, for example, in cancer. But I think it's important to, if you're answering that question, to weigh the benefit of the potential benefit of organic foods with the cost, which sometimes can be more than conventional foods, and the availability and what you have access to. So, if I have somebody who, all they have access to are maybe 3 different types of produce, organic, that's fine. But then I also want them eating other products for variety, and we'll talk about what to do in that case. So what we know is organic foods may have small to moderate increase in some nutrients, so that may be one of the potential benefits. Meat, dairy, and eggs, organic meat, dairy, and eggs may have higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids, which we'll talk about in a minute based on the type of feed they have. But again, if you're eating a plant-based diet and reducing some of these foods, which we're going to talk about, that may not be as big of a consideration. Organic grains may have less heavy metals. And of course, the main reason I think people look to organic is to minimize pesticide residues or pesticide exposure. And again, there are limits to what can be added to conventional produce, but typically they will be higher. One of the ways, if you're eating conventional, that you can reduce exposure to pesticides is, again, by variety, and then washing, scrubbing, cleaning your produce very well. There's a good resource, the Environmental Working Group puts out a list called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So sometimes that's a good resource if you can't go all organic. You want to do organic, but you can't go all the way because of cost, availability. That's a good place to start. So the Dirty Dozen would be places to spend the extra money and try and find organic, and the Clean 15 are generally lower in pesticide residues and probably okay to buy conventional. But again, I think that at a higher level, it's important to remember the benefit of eating all of these foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, whether they're organic or not, far outweighs any risk at this time that we know of. Next slide, please. So, you know, those are kind of the things to eat. I always hate to talk about denial, but these are some of the things that you want to reduce in your diet. So saturated and trans fats. Saturated fats are those that are hard at room temperatures, animal fats, tropical fats, and oils. So again, another reason to cut back on the animal foods and go more towards plants. Trans fats are found more in processed foods, although the food industry is starting to take those things out of their products. Reducing salt, sugar. The current recommendation for sugar is that you consume no more than 10% of your calories from sugar. So for a 2,000-calorie diet, that's about 50 grams of sugar. And if you're needing to eat less than that, again, your amount would be significantly less than that. And what will be helpful is sometime next year you should start seeing added sugars on food labels to help you track the amount of added sugars you're consuming. Certainly alcohol, the current recommendation is no more than 1 drink for women and 2 drinks for men if you drink at all. Looking at the way you prepare your foods, so instead of frying or charbroiling, using lower fat cooking methods like broiling, steaming, poaching, baking. A word of caution is cooking at high temperatures. So if you broil and char food or grill, produces some carcinogens. So lower cooking temperatures and lower fat methods would be the best. And then aiming for low-fat milk products or whatever your dairy alternative may be, with only small portions of animal products. And the current recommendation for red meat is to try and consume no more than 18 ounces a week. So if you look at a typical 3 or 4 ounce portion, or the size of the palm of your hand, or a deck of cards, that would be no more than 4 to 6 times a week. So certainly not large portions of meat every day. So some of the benefits of eating plant-based diet, fruits and vegetables may indirectly influence cancer risk through, again, their effect on energy, calorie intake, and how they may help you achieve and maintain a healthy body weight. And again, there is a possibility that these plant-based foods may directly influence cancer risk, but the data is preliminary based on lab studies and animal studies. But because of all those phytochemicals we find in these foods and how they affect our cells. So when selecting produce, the way to get the most benefit is to really look for the 3 C's, and color is really important. So the more you can get variety as far as the color of your fruits and vegetables, green, orange, red, purple, yellow, white, the color is actually from the phytochemicals in the food. So the more colorful, the more phytochemicals, the more potential benefit. Crunch or potentially cruciferous vegetables, your flowering vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, greens, some of your greens, those help our body's detoxification system. So trying to eat a portion of those every day is what we currently recommend, and citrus, orange, lemon, limes. So getting a variety, not just going for the amount, but getting a variety of fruits and vegetables. And as you see there, cancer survivors should eat no fewer than 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and ideally 8 to 10 or 2 to 3 cups minimally. Again, the data suggests that the majority of Americans are not even at the 5 level yet, so most people have work to do in that area. Next slide. So dietary fat and cancer. There are currently some recommendations to potentially follow a low-fat diet. And some of that is based on the WINS, or the Women's Intervention Nutrition Study in breast cancer survivors, where they found women who followed the lower fat diet compared to controls actually lost more weight, about 6 pounds more than the control group, and had a 24% reduced risk of breast cancer recurrence. And benefit was most in ER/PR negative cancers, which was interesting. But again, I think it's important to find what works for you. Reducing saturated fats is certainly beneficial from a standpoint of your heart health and potentially immune health. And again, those are the solid ones found in animal protein. Eating less omega-6 fats, which are primarily found in processed foods and thought to be inflammatory, so limiting those. Trans fats we mentioned, those are probably even more harmful potentially to our heart. So again, if you're reducing processed foods, you're reducing trans fats, so another reason to avoid processed foods. And then, so again, I like to be careful with the low-fat recommendation, because it's really low-fat when we're referring to animal fats and these trans fats. If you're eating more of a Mediterranean-style diet, you may actually be higher than 20% calories of fat. You can be at 30 to 40% calories from fat if it's coming from unsaturated fats like olives, nuts, and omega-3 fats found in fatty ocean fish like salmon, tuna, sardines. Those we know are healthy fats. They're good for our heart, anti-inflammatory, and potentially other benefits. So these are fats we want to have in our diet. So don't get too hung up on the percentage there, but more reducing the saturated and trans fats and eating more of the unsaturated fats, while you're also lowering your sugar intake. Next slide. So a little bit about dietary supplements, because we get that question quite often, and we like to think everybody can get everything they need from a healthy diet, but again, data would suggest otherwise. And we know from data that people with cancer and cancer survivors do take dietary supplements and often take it without discussing it with their healthcare provider. So very important that you discuss anything you're taking with your healthcare provider to make sure it's safe and doesn't interact with any other medications you're taking. But certainly most people could benefit potentially from a multivitamin. You want to look at the nutrition label and make sure you find one that doesn't have any more than 100% of the daily recommended value, unless, of course, it's been recommended to you from a healthcare provider for another reason. You want to take one with folic acid, selenium, and vitamin D. You've probably seen we have a vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency epidemic in this country, so if you haven't had that tested, it might be a good idea to ask your healthcare provider to check your vitamin D levels to see how much you need. You may need more than what's in a multivitamin. Calcium, some people may need more calcium based on their history, their diet, so an additional calcium supplement may be important for bone health. Another one to think about, if you don't eat fish or you can't eat fish a couple times a week for the omega-3 fatty acids, a fish oil supplement might be something to consider as well. Important point about dietary supplements too is quality is a concern in this industry. The FDA, when they go out and do audits of dietary supplement companies, find concerning quality issues, and so if you're going to take a supplement, there are some resources you can use to look if the product has been tested and come out either good or bad with regards to quality. Consumerlab.com is one. There's a small, you can get some information free there, and there's a small annual membership, but it's a wealth of information regarding supplements, and they have a vitamin mineral encyclopedia where you can get quite a bit of information as well. The USP, or the United States Pharmacopoeia, they have a program where they put their label on supplements that have been tested. So if you see that label, you can be assured of quality. And the NSF, which also has a label they put on their products that have been tested. So those are 3 resources to make sure you're getting a quality supplement. You can discuss it with your healthcare provider, a pharmacist, dietitian, any number of other healthcare providers as well. But that's a way you can find out for yourself. Next slide, please. So again, some people, when we talk about plant-based diet, if they're not used to this approach, can be concerned that it's going to be time-consuming and overwhelming. So these are just a few ideas to give you an example of what this might look like in practice. Some of these things can be prepared in 10 minutes ahead of time and frozen. You can rework leftovers. So I generally work with people who cook only once or twice a week and can make this work without being overwhelming. But if you look at reducing animal fats and eating more plant-based food, one way to do it is to think about eating a vegetarian meal at least once a week if you're not already, and increasing as you're able, eating fish twice a week, and then using poultry and lean meats the rest of the time for your protein source. So overnight oats is an easy breakfast idea where you can basically mix oats, milk or a milk alternative, a little yogurt, chia seeds or ground flaxseed, berries or any amount of fruit. You mix it all together, put it in the refrigerator overnight, it's ready to go in the morning. Omelets with lots of vegetables, smoothies where you can throw everything we just talked about, spinach, fruit, a milk or milk alternative, a little yogurt, seeds, and you have a meal to go. Whole grain muffins, or mochi is sweet brown rice that you can get at a health food store and just put in the oven, and grab some fruit, hard-boiled egg to go, bean burritos or tacos, bean soups, stews, and chilies with cornbread. These can be made in a slow cooker. They freeze well. Fish can be made in 10 minutes, and again, twice a week. Stir fry with all these ingredients. Something as simple as a whole grain pita bread with hummus and vegetables can be a meal. Next slide. Good, ready for the next slide. So that's a very brief, fast overview of nutrition, but equally important is physical activity, particularly as it relates to body weight. And it's important to keep in mind that all activity counts, and any activity is better than inactivity. So walking, gardening, mowing your lawn, all of this counts as activity. The current recommendations are to work towards 150 minutes per week, maybe more if you need to lose weight. If you do very strenuous activity, the recommendation, like running or heavy cycling, the recommendation is 75 minutes a week. So it's 150 minutes for more gentle, moderate activity. Trying to add strength training twice a week if you can, and consider trying yoga. Charli mentioned yoga. Yoga's nice because if you're doing flow yoga, sun salutations, etc., you're getting your activity plus your strength training, and may also help with stress management, sleep, fatigue, etc. Next slide, please. So Charli mentioned finding a support system. These are lifestyle changes where you're going against what many Americans are doing from a standpoint of what they eat and whether or not they move. So finding this, the group of people that can support you as you change your habits, motivate you, help keep you accountable. I mean, I have people who call me when I don't go to the gym for a period of time, and that's what individuals like this can do, or do the activity with you, give you ideas. They can be somebody you call when you don't feel like eating healthy or you don't feel like exercising, to try and give you a little shot in the arm. So important to have a support system working with you rather than against you. Next slide, please. And Charli, I don't know if you wanted to maybe chime in on the next few slides as far as how to really turn this into action for individuals, or if you would prefer I continue going.
Oh, I'll just real quick.
Okay.
Starting where you are, really, really important. I think a lot of people, if they've never exercised and then they have cancer, finding a buddy is probably the best way to get motivated, because if you don't show up, they're going to be calling or texting you.
Yeah. Okay, and again, I think it's important to start where you are and not necessarily worry about where you should be. I mean, we know what the target is, but taking small steps to get there. And again, it doesn't have to be, we sometimes say 30 minutes 5 times a week, but that 30 minutes doesn't have to be all at once, particularly if you are fatigued. It could be 3 10-minute sessions or 6 5-minute sessions. So however you need to do it, and again, it's just like diet. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's what's going to work for you as a lifestyle change. Next slide, please. Very important, much like diet changes, activity, talk to your doctor to make sure it's safe for you to exercise, and any adaptations you need to make. And it's always important to listen to your body. If your body tells you you're tired, it's time to rest. And again, even if it's 5 minutes, you try again a little bit later to do another session. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits of exercise, again, it can help with bone health. It can help with heart health, self-esteem, sexual functioning. Charli talked a little bit about that. May help with anxiety and depression, fatigue, sleep. It can help with side effects like nausea, potentially chemo brain, so help with learning and thinking, and very importantly, help with weight control. Next slide, please. So I mean, I think I talked enough about making sure you listen to how you feel on any given day and making changes based on that. I talked about gardening. Again, everything counts. It's about moving versus not moving. We talked about nausea. If you feel sick, sometimes just a walk and some fresh air and some deep breathing can help with the nausea. Talked about fatigue. Again, it's important to balance how much exercise you can do before you feel like you need to rest so that you don't overdo it. But sometimes just small amounts of activity, breaking the cycle of inactivity, can help with fatigue. And I mentioned the impact on sleep. Of course, if you sleep well from exercise, that will help with fatigue as well. Next slide. So, again, it's like diet. I mean, these are all can all be significant lifestyle changes. So once you get started, you're on your way to try and keep it fresh and keep to it. Again, modify based on what you need. I think setting realistic goals is very important. Again, if you're thinking you have to do 30 minutes, if you're doing nothing and you have to do 30 minutes, that may be frustrating and hard to maintain. So just starting with small bouts of activity. Reward yourself when you reach those goals. So if you're not exercising at all, instead of saying 30 minutes 5 times a week, maybe it's going to be 15 minutes twice a week. Looking at what you think you can do so that you can have some success, reward yourself, and then set a new goal. Be careful with food rewards, though. So if you're rewarding yourself with food, make sure it's something healthy. We talked about the support system. It's natural for all of us when we try and make significant life changes to fall off the wagon or backslide. And there's nothing to feel guilty about there. I talked about, this isn't an all or nothing proposition in any of these areas. It's about doing better tomorrow than you did today, if you can. So guilt is counterproductive. Remembering why you're motivated to do this, I think that's one of the most important things. So when we work with people, we do motivational interviewing to try and understand why people are making changes, and then remind them of that when they're having a challenging time. Next slide, please. So more resources there regarding survivorship care planning and cancer transitions.
Yes, we wanted to share 2 additional resources with everyone. Last year, we held a webinar on survivorship care planning. A survivorship care plan is your roadmap to guide your cancer care following diagnosis and treatment. It can detail your diagnosis, outline the treatments you had or are currently on, and tell you who to contact when you have questions or concerns. It can help explain symptoms or side effects, and it can outline what to do and who to call regarding follow-up care. To view that webinar and resources, please visit www.cancersupportcommunity.org/survivorship-webinar. Also, our Cancer Transition Program, which is a 6-week group for cancer survivors who need and want more support with issues like nutrition, exercise, and emotional health, is available across the country. To learn more about where there are cancer transition sessions going on right now and where they are coming soon, please visit www.cancersupportcommunity.org/cancer-transitions. And as long as we're talking about resources, many of the questions that came in advance were questions about side effects. And if you want more information on coping with side effects, long-term side effects, please visit our cancersupportcommunity.org website and either search for side effects or your particular side effect, or go to www.cancersupport.org/cancer-treatment-side-effects. So at this point in the webinar, we would like to open the discussion up to the audience. We may have answered some of your questions during the presentation. However, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to type them into the question and answer box to the right of your screen. And while we are having people who are currently on the webinar type in their questions, I'm going to start with a few questions that were sent in before, as people were registering, so before the webinar even started. Charli, I'm going to ask you this question first. Do you have any suggestions on dealing with the emotional aspects of body changes due to cancer treatment? We had several people write in who had experienced either colostomies or urostomies or mastectomies and were not as comfortable with their body as they were previous to cancer treatment. Especially one of the folks who asked this question is single.
I hear this a lot. I'll speak to each one, and then in general, my favorite website with regard to an ostomy situation is Stolen Colon. Young cancer survivor who has done a beautiful job on her blog addressing a lot of those things. I also really like the fact that, again, with mentors who've lost their breath, mentors who've lost that feeling of sexuality due to ostomy, or sorts of gynecological treatments that have affected their bodies and their body parts. Those mentors, if you feel comfortable, can really address that. Another way to address that I recently just found was that there is a website called willtolove.com, and Will to Love and the American Cancer Society have partnered on a program that was started by a psychologist who was at a major NCI center for years and years. And you can fill out a questionnaire, and so can your partner, to be part of that research, and it will generate sort of a plan for you on how to feel better about that. Now, with regard to being single and body changes, I get asked this question a lot: when do I tell? Because they want to get ahead of that intimacy curve. And my best advice is not in the first time you meet someone. Many times people need to get to know you. And if you lead with your cancer card, for some people, I've heard that that's a great way that they weed people out. But I also think it really puts you on an unlevel playing field. And when you're leading with that, you're not giving that person to know you outside of cancer. You're taking on cancer as your new coat, as your new identity. So definitely talking about what's different if you're single and then you're about to be in an intimate situation can be very difficult. The most beautiful story I ever heard was from a single woman who was getting undressed in the dark, and she said to him, "I think it's time I told you, I've had a mastectomy." And he flipped this little light on, and he looked in her eyes, and he said, "What did you just say? I can't get past your face." And so I think if we go into these discussions about how we're feeling about this, we'll more times than not be received in a more positive way. It's usually more our issue than the person that we're with. And I say that from experience. I'm a 2-time survivor.
Thanks, Charli. We have quite a few questions about follow-up. Carolyn, would you be able to answer some questions in terms of who should non-cancer-related care be after cancer treatment has ended? Do you go back to your oncologist? Do you go to another doctor?
Sure, I'll try and answer that question. And you mentioned survivorship care plans, and so I think those are a critical piece of helping with this transition. And one of the aims of those is so that you can take, when you're done with treatment, you can take that back to your primary care provider, or use that if you're establishing a new primary care provider, or primary care provider maybe for the first time, to really to help transition care. You may have to go back to the oncologist periodically, but to help that primary care provider really manage you going forward. And so the survivorship care plan will help them know the treatment you received, and if you don't have that, it's important that you at least have some of that to share with your primary care provider, and often your oncologist can make a handoff to your primary care provider, so they know what type of treatment you received, what type of care you may need in the future, checkups and tests, and whether they will help coordinate that, or whether some of them will need to be done where you had your cancer treatment, but what type of long-term effects you may have. So they know, if you're dealing with something, whether or not it may not be related to your cancer treatment. Your primary care provider really will be able to help manage what you need going forward, and kind of be the quarterback, if you will, of making sure you get proper checkups and tests, and then making it clear when you need to go back to the oncologist or where you had your oncology care.
Thank you. I love that idea of the kind of switching off the coordinator of your healthcare team from your oncologist to your primary care once you have gone past active treatment. And again, that survivorship care plan can help with that transition from one as the quarterback of your care team to the other as the quarterback of your care team. Charli, this question is for you. There's several people asking about how do I move beyond fear? What's the best tip to help alleviate stress, anxiety, and worry about my cancer recurring?
That is the biggest question that we get, and a lot of practical things that you can do about that. Anxiety is dynamic, so it's important to understand that it's going to peak at different times during your survivorship. So those oncology visits that were so important and such a sense of reassurance, all of a sudden the oncologist says, you're free of disease, see you in a year, or you're free of disease, bye. So if you've had a pretty moderate to severe health anxiety anyway, I really encourage people to see someone who can help them with that health anxiety, with that constant checking. The recommendation of the National Cancer Institute literature say that interventions with cognitive behavioral therapy or stress management education, which has a lot to do with those mindfulness-based stressor education, have a very positive effect on people, especially people who are fearing recurrence. So to attend counseling regularly can be really, really helpful. That's a place to compartmentalize those fears. I will many, many times ask people really challenging questions during a fear session, I call it, that will get them to talk about what am I going to do to stack the deck. Stacking the deck is really important. Carolyn gave us some beautiful ideas and some really good information about how we stack the deck with nutrition. One thing I know for sure is that there's a huge correlation between our mood and our food, and all of those plants and vegetables and fruit things that she was talking about will enhance those serotonin levels in your brain, and so will exercise. And you can Google a ton of literature out there that's well supported that cleaner eating and moving can really help with those fear of recurrence. And relaxation and breath work, very, very important. Mindfulness-based education, many places are doing this now, including libraries and YMCAs. If you can get in a mindfulness-based group and do this with other people, it's another way to decrease your isolation as well, and you just learn more on how to activate that side of the brain, that parasympathetic nervous system. The other thing I have encouraged people to do is to get a checklist of all the things that they know are going to help them stack the deck, and put that checklist out front every day. And as you move down that checklist with, did I have 5 fruits and vegetables today? Did I move my body for 20 minutes? Did I talk to someone? Did I belly laugh? If you didn't get through your checklist, you didn't fail. It just means that tomorrow you're going to start with the things you didn't check off. And little by little, you'll be able to put more things in place that are going to help you deal with that fear of recurrence. But it's very, very real. I'm 20-something years out, and I still have my moments.
Great. Thanks, Charli. We might have time for just 2 more questions, and I'm afraid that we have quite a few more. So we will follow up when we post this webinar online. You will get an email with a link to the recording as well as to a list of resources that include resources for longer-term side effects from treatment, because those are some of the questions, some of the big questions that we've left unanswered. Carolyn, would you be able to speak to any suggestions for coping with neuropathy, or is that something that we should put people in touch with more resources after this webinar?
Yeah, I think more resources will be helpful. I mean, neuropathy is a difficult one, and right now the current guidelines or recommendations are really moving towards really 1 or 2 prescription medications. So talking with your if you're still seeing your oncologist or your primary care provider about that would be helpful. So we can provide more resources for that.
Great, thank you. And then Charli, do you have any resources for helping with sleeplessness? How do you get uninterrupted sleep?
Well, as Carolyn stated earlier, I wanted to make sure I wasn't still on mute, sorry about that. Exercise and getting sunshine in the morning between the hours of like 8 and 11 really does, there really does make a difference. And good basic sleep hygiene, which you can Google online, what does sleep hygiene look like, and it just means getting your lights low about an hour before you go to bed, getting off of your screens. I know that's really hard for people to get off of your screens. And just allowing the body to slowly move into a more relaxed state. Some people like to use apps like Headspace or Calm, and that's not a screen but an audio program. One thing that I didn't mention before that ties along with this is there are some really great resources out there and apps for anxious brains. So we can certainly get that out to people if people have any, any questions about what apps seem to work really good that have a little bit of science behind them. That's another way to get your brain calmed down at night, is using an app.
Great. And Charli, I know you touched on this somewhat in your presentation, but someone has a question about transitioning back to work full-time after not working during treatment.
Cancer and Careers. They have a whole downloadable packet on how to return to work, how to even, if you're changing positions or you've decided to change careers like I did after my diagnosis, how to write your resume about that gap, and how to address questions about that gap in an interview.
Great. And one last question for Carolyn. Is avoiding sugar an effective way of preventing cancer or cancer recurrence? And if you're talking, you're on mute.
Hello?
There you go.
Oh.
Now.
It didn't look like my mute button was on, but so not completely avoiding sugar or completely avoiding sugar is probably not necessary, and it's more an indirect association. So by reducing sugar and therefore reducing calories, you may reduce the risk of cancer and cancer recurrence. So I mentioned, shooting for under 50 grams if you're on a 2,000 calorie diet, and it would be less if you're consuming less of that. But so you don't need to avoid sugar altogether, but certainly reducing added sugar and getting sugar from more natural sources like fruits and vegetables, and potentially dairy products if you do dairy. The interesting thing is if you completely avoid sugar, and I've seen people take it to an extreme where they're really avoiding most carbohydrates, your body knows how to make sugar, and it'll make sugar from muscle and protein that we eat, and potentially muscle if we're not eating enough. So that's actually not good for your health either. So I think the best recommendation is to get under the 50 grams, and if you can, work down further, depending on your calorie intake, even better.
One more nutrition question from folks who have estrogen-sensitive cancers. Is there anything that they should know specifically about nutrition?
I think, a really good resource in this area is the American Institute for Cancer Research, and they're a wonderful resource just to get a plethora of information on nutrition and cancer and recipes and meal ideas. But they have a report specific to breast cancer, and it's very similar to what we mentioned. Reducing, the first would be achieving and maintaining a healthy body weight, activity, and then reducing the saturated fats. Certainly, reducing sugar can't hurt, and eating a high fiber diet, eating as much fiber as you can tolerate. So that the plant-based diet would help with that.
Great. Well, thank you both, Charli and Carolyn, for contributing your time and sharing this important information with us. You've been fabulous panelists. I also want to thank all of our participants who've been listening for your enthusiasm and the questions that have made today's webinar a success. And Cancer Support Community would love to take a moment to thank our program supporters, Cancer Treatment Centers of America, and Genentech. And in a moment, you will be automatically redirected to a survey to talk about this webinar. We greatly appreciate any feedback you may have. Thank you for your participation, and have a great rest of your day or evening.